first rays of sunlight pierced through the thick morning fog, painting the sleepy farm in hues of gold and orange. As dawn broke over the sleepy countryside, the air remained heavy with an uneasy calm. Shadowy figures slinked across the fields, their faces obscured, cloaked by the mist and the promise of chaos. Freshly tilled earth lay quiet, having seen more than its share of storms, but today would test its resilience once more. Outlaws, a raucous band of men led by a notorious figure named Gentry, crept toward the modest farmhouse at the end of the lane. The air crackled with tension, every heartbeat echoing like a distant drum in the silence. Gentry had made a name for himself, raiding towns, snatching gold and goods with ruthless efficiency. But now, his eyes glinted with a different hunger. What lay before him was not just dirt and wheat, but an opportunity, a farmer known for his stubbornness and rumored wealth. But what Gentry didn't realize was the heart beating inside that weathered farmhouse, the heart of Jacob Miller, a man forged through trials even the strongest steel would envy. Jacob had lived on this land his entire life, growing with it, nurtured by its soil. The hard lines of his face told tales of grief and joy, while his calloused hands bore the marks of labor and love. He wasn't just defending a piece of property. He was protecting his legacy, the dreams of his father, and the whispers of his ancestors that seemed to float through the rows of corn. As the outlaws crept closer, adrenaline and greed coursed through Gentry's veins. He motioned to his men, a motley crew, some with wild eyes, others with haughty smiles. They all had stories etched in their souls, losses and betrayals that shaped their twisted moral compass. But they had one shared belief. Today, they were the thunderstorm about to break the calm. "Miller's an easy mark," Gentry growled confidently as the last shadows of night faded. "Just a farmer thinks he owns this land." As they approached, a flock of birds took flight from the trees, startled by their presence. The sound rushed into the air, a frantic warning, but Gentry only grunted, his focus unwavering. His eyes remained locked on that farmhouse, the very symbol of everything he wanted to conquer. What Gentry didn't know was that Jacob sat at the heavy wooden table inside, a steaming cup of coffee warming his hands. He could feel it in his bones, a stirring in the air like the calm before a storm. The sheep outside bleated nervously, and the breeze seemed to whisper secrets. Jacob had weathered many storms in his lifetime, and he knew well how fierce the tempests could grow. Just yesterday, he had noticed strange tracks near the edge of his property, but today he was ready. Jacob stood to glance out the window, the early morning light revealing the distant figures. His heart didn't race but steadied, like the roots of the trees that had weathered 1,000 storms. He took a deep breath, squared his shoulders, and made his decision. He moved deliberately, his thoughts clear as crystal water. He reached for the old flintlock rifle hanging by the door, grimy from years of neglect, but trusted in its own way. A farmer is a protector by nature, whether it's of his land, crops, or family. Jacob had fought battles even before the outlaws approached, quiet battles against nature and the elements, against loss and hardship. With every step, the resolve inside him hardened. He carried himself with the weight of 1,000 years of history, the echoes of farmers long gone, silent yet present within him. As he stepped outside, he felt the chill of the morning air, almost electric, as though the world itself was holding its breath. The outlaws stole through the fields with purpose, their whispers thick with anticipation, their confidence growing with every step. But Gentry miscalculated the calm coming from the farmhouse. "Wait, stay low," he instructed, taking on the mantle of authority as he gestured toward the woods behind Jacob's home. They huddled closer, eyes glued to the line of the horizon where the sun began to rise, as if it were a signal for the battle ahead. But there was new light dawning on the situation before them, a realization yet to emerge. From the farmhouse, Jacob's movements were calm yet deliberate. He positioned himself in full view, the rifle gripped tightly against the ground. "You don't know what you're stepping into," he declared, his voice carrying over the gentle rustle of the wind. Each word dripped with gravity, embodying the spirit of those who had walked the land before him. Gentry froze, surprise mixing with disbelief as he stared through the morning haze. "Just a farmer. Crops. My life is more than fields and dirt," Jacob replied firmly. The outlaws shared uneasy glances, their boldness crumbling under the weight of Jacob's unwavering gaze. They could see it in his posture, the way he stood firm against the rising sun. He was the embodiment of the land itself. Gentry's bravado flickered, but he quickly masked it. "You think you can scare us away with words?" His laughter echoed, but it caught in his throat as Jacob took a step forward, the rifle steadily raising. "Leave," Jacob commanded, the single word ringing like a bell of purpose. Every outlaw felt it wash over them, a chill creeping down their spine. And in that moment they realized Jacob was not just a farmer. He was a wall of unwavering spirit. Even against the odds, he stood tall. The farmers of the land had always faced greater foes than decrepit greed. "Your kind never knows when to walk away," Jacob continued, his determination casting a long shadow over the band of thieves. Just then, as if the earth itself had responded to his call, a sudden gust of wind blew through. It seemed to swirl around him, almost summoning the ghosts of ancestors long gone. Gentry hesitated, realizing he had underestimated the man before him. The no-nonsense weathered farmer with his resolute heart spoke more than words ever could. There was in him a fierce, undying love for his land, for his family, for every grain of soil that had nurtured generations. "Go home. This is my land and I'll protect it," Jacob said, voice steady, eyes like steel. Just then, the sun broke fully free from the horizon, sending a wash of light that bathed the barn and the fields in illuminating warmth. Gentry felt a twinge of doubt. What if this wasn't going to be the easy score he had envisioned? It sent ripples of confusion through the ragtag team, whose bravado had once bubbled so confidently. "Listen, Gentry," one of his men spoke, glancing nervously toward Jacob. But Gentry's pride raged like a wildfire. "Don't be weak." That was the moment a flicker of rebellion burned in his men's eyes. They were beginning to see through the fog of their shared greed. One of them murmured, casting another glance at Jacob, who still stood firm, rifle unwavering. "Stay with me," Gentry barked, trying to reestablish control, yet his voice was tinged with uncertainty. The other outlaws looked at each other, weighing the cost of their aggression. Jacob took a slow step forward, the rifle finally raised, a symbol of his resolve. In a twist of fate, as the tension hung thick in the air, the morning seemed to exhale. The sunlight illuminated the scene, revealing the seriousness in Jacob's eyes. This was different from any fight Gentry and his men had faced. Here stood a man who had nothing left to lose. With thousands of generations behind him, Jacob felt the earth beneath him pulse with energy. The earth beneath felt solid, as did the bond between man and land forged through sweat and blood. Gentry's bravado began to fray. His men faltered, and the weight of reality crashed down like the echo of a distant thunder. They saw there was a choice to be made: to walk away with whatever pride they could muster, or charge headlong into a battle that would show them no mercy. With a final look at Jacob's calm yet fierce demeanor, Gentry's shoulders fell slightly. He turned to his men. "We're leaving." As they retreated into the mist, the early sun began to rise fully on the horizon, shedding light on the victory born not from violence, but from the steadfastness of one man willing to face down an army. Jacob stood as a protector of not just fields, but of dreams, love, and a legacy that time could not erase. When Gentry and his crew disappeared into the distance, Jacob lowered his rifle, the weight of the world now lifted. The air was calm once more, filled with the gentle sounds of the countryside coming alive with day. As he returned to the farmhouse, every step felt lighter, fueled by a sense of triumph that would linger long after the sun had set. It wasn't just a battle he had won. It was a testament to the resilience and spirit of a farmer, a legacy of strength, unwavering under a rising sun. The sun was just beginning to stretch its golden fingers across the horizon when the outlaws crept through the fields. It was a moment that would be etched into the town's lore for years to come. A band of thieves ready to plunder a farmer's livelihood, but not knowing the confrontation they would meet at the break of dawn. Jacob Miller stood by the window of his modest farmhouse, staring straight into the impending chaos. The air felt thick, buzzing with tension, and something deep within him sensed that today would not be just another ordinary sunrise. There was more than just light spilling into the world. There was purpose, and beneath it all, defiance. With hands worn from years of labor, Jacob grasped the cup of steaming coffee, letting the warmth seep into his calloused fingers. He had spent countless mornings like this, watching the sun rise over fields that had fed his family for generations. But today, the gentle rustle of wind among the wheat carried portents, whispering stories of danger and resilience. Across the fields, the outlaws prepared for their strike, shadows moving like phantoms in the dawn mist. At the head of their pack was Gentry, a man known for his cold-blooded ambition. His reputation preceded him like a storm cloud, quick to anger, quicker to act, and merciless in his pursuits. He had roamed the lands for years, leaving only destruction behind him, leaving towns trembling in his wake. Today, he had set his sights on the Miller farm, thinking Jacob would be a simple target, ripe for the taking. The faint sound of hooves and whispered plans drifted toward Jacob, and his heart began to pound, not with fear, but with a hardened resolve. He had faced storms in his life. He had weathered floods that swept away neighbors' homes and droughts that turned the earth to dust. But today, he was ready to make a stand. He could already hear the laughter and bravado of the outlaws, their confidence swelling like the rising sun. "Every man has a breaking point," he muttered to himself, setting his coffee down. He moved from the window and examined the old flintlock rifle leaning against the wall. Dust etched its surfaces, but it was still a faithful companion. He had inherited it from his father, who had taught him that true strength lay not just in weapons, but in spirit. It was this spirit he felt surging inside him now as he held the rifle close. Outside, Jacob stepped into the chill of dawn, a breath of fresh air filling his lungs. He scanned the fields, the tall blades of grass swaying as if warning him of the approaching danger. It reached deep into his bones that this was more than a fight for his land. This was a matter of pride, a matter of family legacy. "Come on, Miller," Gentry called out, his voice cutting through the stillness. Laughter erupted from the gang. They felt emboldened, as if the laughter alone could coerce Jacob from his sanctuary. Little did they know that their jeering would awaken something formidable within him. Jacob steadied himself, the adrenaline pumping through his veins like wildfire. He could hear the unmistakable sound of their boots crunching on the gravel and felt the weight of his choices press against him. And as he lifted his rifle, he could feel the echoes of wisdom overtaking his fear. "Go away, Gentry. You don't belong here," Jacob shouted back, his voice unwavering. It cut through the air with an honesty that seemed to catch the outlaws off guard. They stopped, their laughter faltering and their bravado dampened by his unyielding tone. Gentry laughed, masking irritation with bravado. "It's just a few pieces of land. You think this will scare us off?" The bravado felt forced, an armor against the shame of doubt creeping into their ranks. Unperturbed, Jacob squared his shoulders, stepping forward into the dawn light. "Maybe so, but they didn't have what I have. This land is my blood, my heritage." There was a silence that fell now, a stillness as if nature itself were holding its breath. It was a moment caught between realization and disbelief, a weight that broke the air like the crack of thunder. The outlaws shuffled, glancing at each other, uncertainty flickering in their eyes. Perhaps they didn't fully comprehend the fight that had just ignited within this one man. "You've got guts, I'll give you that," Gentry said slowly, trying to regain control of the situation. "But you're outnumbered, old man." "It's not the gun that matters," Jacob replied, his grip steady and firm. With that, Jacob lifted the rifle, aiming it toward the ground but ready to act if they charged. The moment was electric, every heartbeat echoing a primal call, a call to protect home and hearth, even when the odds seemed insurmountable. Gentry's smirk fell away as he stared into Jacob's eyes, unyielding like the earth beneath them. The farmer appeared transformed, a figure of stoic strength against the chaos surrounding him. Gentry shouted, frustration bubbling to the surface. With this declaration, he turned and barked an order, prompting his men to take cover among the trees. They drew their weapons, shifting from dark mischief to tense anticipation, hearts racing with adrenaline. In that moment, Jacob's world slowed down. Everything around him sharpened into focus, the sound of a crow calling from a nearby tree, the sweet fragrance of the morning dew, the the rustling leaves whispering forgotten tales. And with that clarity came the certainty that he would not yield. His voice rang out once more, fierce and resolute. Jacob's challenge echoed across the fields, resonating with a strength that startled even him. At the core of his being, he felt the fear retreating like shadows before the rising sun. No longer was he just a farmer. He was a guardian of his land, a sentinel determined to protect what was rightfully his. The outlaws exchanged uneasy glances. The illusion of invincibility was starting to crumble beneath the weight of Jacob's conviction. There was something grounding about a man willing to lay everything on the line, someone who understood that land was not just soil. It was history, hope, and devotion. Gentry, realizing his men were hesitating, checked his composure, desperate to salvage the moment. "Get out there." But his words were now falling on hesitant ears. It was clear that the men were not only facing Jacob but themselves. They sensed the palpable courage radiating from him, a shield crafted not from weaponry but from unwavering determination. One of the younger outlaws, a boy barely older than a child, whispered, staring at the rifle pointing their way. The seeds of doubt that Gentry had managed to plant began to sprout. Jacob watched the exchange, giving another chance to those who still carried a flicker of humanity within them. "You can turn around," he invited, his voice softer now, threading through the tension. "Leave the shadows behind." The words hung in the air, potent and sincere. The boy looked at his companions, conscience resting with loyalty. Gentry, sensing the shift, tried to escalate his bravado. "Don't listen to him, he's just a farmer, we're outlaws." But Jacob's voice rang true, a steady drumbeat of resolve. The dawn light continued to rise, illuminating the choices now before them. In that swirling chaos of emotions, fear, greed, ambiguity, something new began to spark. Some of the outlaws felt the roots of rebellion sprout against Gentry's coercion, shifting the balance of power in a way he hadn't foreseen. "I don't want to do this," the young outlaw murmured, stepping back. It was a small act, but it was enough to draw the attention of others. A ripple began to form, pushing back against Gentry's control, exposing the cracks in his bravado. Gentry's fury boiled over, desperation clawing at his mind. "You're turning your back on the life you chose." But Jacob's strength only grew. "No, this isn't who you are. You were not born to steal. You were born full of potential." The dawning realization washed over the group like the sunlight breaking through the clouds. One by one, some began to lower their weapons, their fear unraveling in the face of Jacob's steadfastness. "Let's go, Gentry," murmured a tall man with a weathered face. "He's right." "No," Gentry shouted, but his words echoed back as he stood alone, the determination of those around him fading like shadows at high noon. Caught in the web of moral struggle, one by one, the outlaws began to retreat, backs turned on Gentry, their courage reshaping into a quieter strength. They melted into the mist, abandoning their dreams of riches for the chance of a different life, echoing Jacob's claim to the land, a tangible reminder that bravery isn't always loud. Sometimes it manifests in quiet choices. And as dawn blossomed into day, Jacob lowered his rifle, even as his heart raced with uncertainty. The confrontation had transformed him, awakening a fierce sense of purpose that would linger long after the outlaws had vanished. In those precious moments of silence, with the sun fully alight above the horizon, he felt the land beneath him pulse. It was not just dirt and crops, it was history, tenacity, and love, qualities that could not be taken away. Jacob stood for more than a farmer. He was a protector, a symbol of hope against the tempests of deceit. As the warmth of the sun enveloped him, he knew in every fiber of his being he would not budge. As long as the sun rose over his fields, he would defend the life he built, just as generations before had faced their struggles, bold and unyielding against whatever dared to threaten their legacy. And perhaps, somewhere in that dawnlit horizon, Gentry would learn the true strength of a man who fights not just for land, but for the very essence of who he is. As dawn broke over the quiet countryside, the soft golden glow painted the sky, unaware of the tension lurking just beneath the surface. In the distance, dark shapes moved through the wispy morning fog, a band of outlaws, their hearts racing with greed, creeping toward the small farmhouse at the edge of the fields. They believed this day would be theirs, another easy score to add to their growing list of conquests. But inside the farmhouse, Jacob Miller's senses were on high alert, sharpened by years of tending to the land that held his family's history. He had risen at sunrise, as was his habit, to admire the fields he had cultivated with sweat and care. Like a mother cradling her child, he nurtured every inch of soil, every crop, and every seed that had been planted. Today, as he stared out of the weathered window, there was something amiss in the air, a disturbance that sent a shiver down his spine. The outlaws were closing in, their laughter barely audible over the soft sounds of nature waking up. Jacob's eyes narrowed as he watched the shadows shift, becoming more distinct as they moved closer to his homestead. They had no idea who they were dealing with. This was his land. He had fought against storms and droughts, he had suffered losses, and he had learned resilience the hard way. "I will not back down," he whispered to himself, gripping the worn table as if it held the strength of generations past. He took a deep breath, his mind racing through memories of hardship and victory. This was his moment to stand firm, to claim his space in the world. The leader of the gang, a man known as Gentry, was tall and rugged, his face hardened like the bark of an old oak tree. He thrived on fear and chaos, feeding off the uncertainty he created in others. "Miller's just a farmer. He'll give in without a fight," he boasted to his gang as they hid behind the tall grass, plotting their ambush. As they neared the farmhouse, Gentry's bravado swelled. There were 4 of them, each one craving the thrill of the heist, drunk on the promise of easy riches. Little did they know that Jacob was not a target they could easily intimidate. For him, this was not just a fight for property. It was a battle for everything he held dear, his family's legacy, his way of life. With a steady hand, Jacob reached for the old flintlock rifle that hung above the fireplace, a family heirloom passed down through the generations. It was a weapon of both protection and pride. The rifle had weathered storms with him, and today it would stand as a symbol of resistance. He checked the ammunition, the metallic click echoing in the quiet as he prepared himself for the confrontation ahead. Outside, Gentry's gang gathered, their whispers mixing with the morning breeze. "We'll take what we want, and he won't stand in our way," Gentry declared, a cruel smile forming on his lips. The others nodded, emboldened by a sense of mischief and the thrill of a raid. But Jacob knew something they didn't. He had been fighting battles long before they arrived. "Just a farmer," he muttered, his heart steady. As the gang approached closer, Jacob stepped out onto the porch, rifle cradled in his arms, the morning sun casting a long shadow behind him. The air was thick, pregnant with anticipation. He could hear the soft rustle of the grass as the outlaws drew near, their confidence oozing into the air, but he was unyielding, a figure rooted in defiance. Jacob called, his voice commanding yet calm, a stark contrast to the malicious laughter that erupted from the gang. Gentry taunted, breaking through the moment of tension with his bravado. "You think you can take us all on?" Jacob stood tall, eyes steady. A man's worth isn't measured by his title but is found in the courage of his heart. The moment hung heavily in the air, and for a brief instant Gentry hesitated. The words sank in, pulling at his bravado. Deep down, he knew that fighting someone who was willing to stand their ground was riskier than taking what was easy. But the thrill of intimidation reeled him back. He ordered, frustration blossoming into anger. The outlaws rushed forward, the sound of their boots tearing through the grass, a chaotic symphony of impending violence. Jacob took a steadying breath, his mind clearing as the adrenaline surged through him. He raised the rifle, aiming not to kill but to make a statement, a clear warning. The sight of it, gleaming in the sunlight, caught the gang's attention, and in that moment time seemed to stand still. This was not just a weapon, it was a testament to his resolve. He shouted, a command that resonated in the very core of their being. Gentry faltered, eyes widening at the sight of the old farmer brandishing the rifle. This wasn't the fearful man he had expected. This was a man ready to defend what was sacred, a man with nothing left to lose. Gentry shouted, but it was too late. The gang had already crossed the threshold into the unknown, 1 foot on unstable ground. A palpable tension crackled in the air as Jacob's presence shifted the balance. "Leave my land or face the consequences," he declared, voice unwavering. And as they stood there in the charged silence, Gentry felt a flicker of doubt claw at him like a wild animal. For all his bravado, they were not just facing a lone farmer, they were experiencing a reckoning. In that moment, Jacob caught sight of the youngest outlaw, a boy barely in his 20s, hesitating at the edge of the chaos. He could see the uncertainty in his eyes, reflecting a struggle between loyalty and moral clarity. "Don't do this, lad," Jacob said, softening his voice. "Choose to walk away." The boy's gaze darted between Gentry and Jacob, uncertainty soaking him like rain. He felt the weight of the earth beneath him, the roots of a life waiting to bloom. As Jacob held his stance, sunlight warmed the boy's face, illuminating the conflict within. He was not just caught between a rock and a hard place, he was at a crossroads. In that moment, the boy turned back to Gentry, the tide of loyalty fading against something far deeper. "They're right," the boy said, his voice quivering but progressively gaining strength. Gentry shouted, rage boiling over. "We're outlaws, we don't back down." But Jacob's voice sliced through Gentry's fury, calm yet fierce. "You can choose a new path, we all can." The words sowed doubt among the gang, whispering truths they had long ignored. One by one, they began to step back into the shadows they had emerged from. Jacob could feel the power shift in his favor, the trust between man and land strengthening before his eyes. Gentry's anger exploded, a desperate man's final flame igniting. "You don't know what you're doing." But the young outlaw stood firm, emboldened by Jacob's spirit as he turned his back on the gang. "No, you're the weak one," he said, heart pounding as he stepped away. The realization hit hard. Jacob had weathered storms, faced loss, and stood up to adversity all his life. For him, this moment would define him, regardless of what transpired next. "Let them go," Jacob said, lowering his rifle but not relinquishing his resolve. As Gentry fumed, the silent power of Jacob's spirit resonated through the air. Gentry turned to his remaining men, who now seemed uncertain and frightened by the unexpected turn of events. The outlaws began to back away, one by one, the air heavy with regret and shame. Each step backward from the front line felt like a choice, a chance to step back into the light. Gentry's bravado crumbled as some of his men turned to leave, deserting the once mighty band of thieves. In the wake of their retreat, Jacob breathed a deep sigh of relief, shoulders loosening as weight slipped away. The morning sun streamed down, chasing away the shadows, not just of the night but of the doubt that had threatened to consume him. He turned to watch the young outlaw disappear into the foliage, a new life waiting outside of violence. Perhaps, he thought, this boy would find his purpose where the sun rises, far away from the dark allure of thievery. With every lingering breath, the harmony of the land rekindled. Jacob glanced around him, knowing that he had faced more than just a group of outlaws. He had faced himself, and in doing so, he had emerged stronger. As he looked out over the fields, a sense of purpose washed over him, more profound than any fear that had haunted him. Defiant and unyielding, he remained steadfast, a sentinel of the land and a guardian of the legacy he held dear. The dawn had brought more than sunlight. It had forged an oath within him, not to his fields alone, but to every dream that had taken root beneath the earth, a promise that as long as he stood, he would defend what was right, fiercely and unabashedly. The outlaws had come seeking easy prey, but what they found was far beyond their grasp. A spirit unbroken, a man who understood the strength of love for one's home, and the fierceness of a heart unwilling to bend. And as the sun climbed higher, Jacob knew that he would never waver. This land was his, and he would stand strong, unyielding as the mountains in the distance, his legacy carved deep into the fabric of time. The first sliver of dawn revealed a quiet, unassuming farmhouse nestled among sprawling fields of golden wheat, untouched by time. A heavy mist lay low on the ground, as if the world was still in slumber. But in the depths of that stillness, something was stirring, a sense of danger, a brewing storm of violence that was about to break. Across the fields there was movement, a band of outlaws clad in dark clothing, their faces obscured by shadows, creeping closer to Jacob Miller's land. Gentry, the gang's leader, strode at the front, a crooked smile stretching across his rugged face. In his mind, today was theirs for the taking. All they needed was a little intimidation, a little chaos, and the small farm would yield its treasures easily. Jacob stood by the window, coffee mug in hand, watching as twilight slowly yielded to the light. The early sunlight streamed through the gaps in the curtains, illuminating his weathered face and deep-set eyes. He had risen early, taking solace in the quiet beauty of his land, feeling each breath fill his lungs with the promise of a new day. But as he gazed out into the gathering fog, he sensed something was wrong. The way the birds had hushed their songs, the way the morning breeze carried a chill, it all felt like a warning. Suddenly, the distant laughter of men wove its way through the air, rough and mocking. Jacob's heart sank as he recognized the voices of Gentry and his gang, known for their ruthless reputation that sent shivers through nearby towns. Taking a deep breath, he put down his coffee and reached for the old flintlock rifle hanging above the mantel, a family heirloom that had weathered many storms. It had seen danger before and carried with it the spirit of those who had fought to protect their home. "Not today," he murmured to himself, his resolve hardening. Jacob knew he couldn't let these men trample over what he held dear. The land was more than just a patch of earth. It was his heritage, his blood, and his family's legacy. He stepped outside, the cool morning air biting his skin, grounding him in the present moment. As he scanned the fields, he could see the dark figures coming closer. They moved with purpose, confidence swelling with each step. Jacob understood the psychology of fear. He had seen it before on the faces of men who underestimated him. But today, he was not just a farmer with a rifle. He was a guardian of all that he had built with his own hands, a bulwark against those who sought to tear it down. "Come on, Miller," Gentry shouted, the playful taunt dripping with bravado. The gang erupted in laughter, their voices buoyed by the thrill of mischief. Jacob stood firm, unwavering. "Get off my land, Gentry." His voice carried across the fields, tougher than the weathered oak trees that surrounded him. There was no hesitation, no quiver in his tone. Gentry retorted, feigning bravado. "We're outlaws." With a wild gesture, he beckoned his crew forward, absorbed in the dark energy that fueled their intentions. As they approached, the laughter turned to jeering, but a flicker of doubt clouded Gentry's eyes. He stood like a wolf at the head of his pack, but he was still just a man who had made enemies along his path. Jacob recognized that moment of hesitation. He had spent years working on his land, building relationships with neighbors and nurturing an unwavering spirit. He challenged, his eyes narrowing. Gentry's bravado cracked, but he masked it with anger. "You think you can scare me with words?" He signaled to his men, urging them closer, but doubt lingered in the air. Jacob lifted his rifle, not with fear but with purpose. "I'm not afraid of you or your gang," he declared, voice steady and unwavering. The barrel gleamed in the morning sun as he pointed it toward the ground. Real talk to stand for, real courage infused his words, and even the hardest of hearts in Gentry's crew felt a tremor of uncertainty. Gentry detected the shift. Something was nagging at him, maybe even shaking his resolve. He could feel the wind whipping around him, carrying the scent of earth and grass, solidifying the truth that this wasn't just another raid. It was a confrontation with everything Jacob Miller stood for. Yet Gentry was too proud to back down. He yelled, trying to rally his crew, but Jacob's gaze remained steady. He carried the weight of generations, a lineage of resilience that gave him strength. "If you think I'm just a farmer, you underestimate me," Jacob replied, heart pounding in his chest, brimming with determination. He could feel it building inside him like the first rumble of thunder before a storm. The outlaws surged forward, emboldened by Gentry's words, but Jacob stood his ground. The heart of a protector surged within him. Fear was a weapon wielded by the unprepared, and today he was ready to wield his own. Gentry shouted, trying to regain control. Jacob's pulse quickened as the conflict intensified. He understood the psychology behind moments like this, how fear could either paralyze or galvanize you. He felt the weight of his own history pressing against him, the many battles he had faced in life, both within and outside. In the chaos, he glimpsed the youngest of the outlaws, a boy no older than 20, frozen at the line dividing them. The fear in the boy's eyes reflected Jacob's own memories of youthful uncertainty. "Don't do this," Jacob called out, his voice slicing through the tension. "You have the power to choose a different path, this life." For a heartbeat, a flicker of doubt danced across the boy's features, and Jacob knew he was breaking through. Gentry yelled, desperate to maintain his hold on the gang, but uncertainty festered among the ranks. Jacob could see it, the doubt spreading like wildfire. Gentry gripped the reins of chaos, but deep down he felt it slipping. He blustered, but the fierce resolve in Jacob's eyes held the gang's attention, revealing the cracks in their delusions of invincibility. "You don't have to be this," Jacob pressed, feeling the power of truth resonate in the charged air. "Look at what you're doing." The boy shifted uneasily, caught between two worlds. Every outlaw carried scars of loss and betrayal. They were not born to be villains. For every choice they made, they were losing a part of themselves, a part that wanted to dream, that wished for something better. Maybe he's right," the boy murmured, stepping back from the gang, his voice trembling yet resolute. "No." Gentry barked, but the dynamics had shifted, and his gang began to waver. One by one, they glanced at each other, the weight of Jacob's words resonating. The youngest outlaw, still unsure, took another step backward, his loyalty torn between the gang and the undeniable truth resonating from Jacob. "Let go of this, build something worth fighting for," Jacob urged, his voice steady, piercing through the thick fog of gang loyalty. He held the young outlaw's gaze, heart pounding with unspoken hope. The outlaws stood still, the remnants of their bravado crumbling, and despite Gentry's growls of frustration, doubt began echoing in the minds of the men around him. They had chosen this life out of fear, out of a longing for power, but in that decisive moment they faced the truth of their choices. Jacob asked, spirit rising as he continued to address the boy, his sincerity cutting through the air. "I don't want this," the boy finally admitted, voice shaking. In that moment, a shift took place. The air thick with tension began to clear, and the sense of purpose that Jacob embodied was inescapable. It rippled through the gang members, igniting doubts that had long festered. Gentry shouted, trying to regain his dominance, but the voice of desperation only drove them further from him. One by one, they took steps back. The sun fully broke over the horizon, illuminating not only the landscape but the reality of their actions. Each moment of clarity chipped away at the fear-based loyalty that had bound them to Gentry. With trembling hands, the boy took a step back from Gentry's side, solidifying the split within the gang. "I can't do this anymore," he whispered, as if declaring liberation. The other outlaws began to shift, teetering on the edge of choice. "Maybe we shouldn't follow Gentry," one of them spoke up, voice filled with uncertainty but a hint of hope. Jacob watched as the band began to fray. Gentry's grip had weakened, desperation oozing from his pores as he stared in disbelief. He yelled, voice tinged with rage, but it was too late. The power of courage had begun to take root where fear had once flourished. Just like that, Jacob had become a beacon, shining bright in the morning light. He stood firm, hands steady on his rifle as the gang fell apart, their bravado lost against the undeniable truth that had unfolded before them. Gentry's voice echoed hollow, a desperate cry fading into the whisper of the wind. "You'll regret this, but at least we'll be free," was the boy's reply, finally stepping away, joining the path toward redemption. Jacob set down his rifle, feeling the weight lift off his shoulders as he watched the transformation unfold. This wasn't just a victory over outlaws. It was a moment of redemption for lost souls finding their way back to light. The morning sun kissed the fields, revealing the beauty Jacob had fought so hard to preserve. He stood steady, breathing in the promise of a brand new day, an echo of hope reverberating through the air. As Gentry backed away into the mist, the newfound allies emerged, stepping gingerly away from the shadows he had cast. Jacob felt a swell of triumph, a victory over fear, a testament to the unwavering spirit of one man in the face of chaos. He turned toward his fields, the golden wheat swaying gently in the breeze, and contemplated the resilience of the land, the legacy handed down through generations. "This is who I am," he thought, filled with a swelling sense of purpose. Today had not just been a struggle. It was a reminder of strength and courage, a testament that sometimes being human means standing firm when the world is trying to push you down. Jacob knew he might have faced down outlaws at sunrise, but more importantly, he had illuminated a different path for those who had lost their way. In the stillness that followed, he set his sights on the horizon, knowing that as long as he stood for what was right, there would always be hope blooming anew. The first light of dawn crept across the fields of wheat, casting a gold hue over the quiet countryside. Silence reigned, thick and heavy, as the sun peeked over the horizon, but in the hushed stillness lay the tension of a brewing storm. Deep in the shadows, a group of outlaws lurked, their hearts racing with anticipation and greed. At the edge of the fields, Jacob Miller stood by the weathered window of his farmhouse, the familiar scent of earth and dew filling his senses. He had spent years tending to this land, carving a life out of the soil that whispered stories of his ancestors. But today, that peace was shattered by the weight of impending chaos. Jacob narrowed his eyes, scanning the horizon as he sensed something ominous lurking in the air. It wasn't the cawing of the crows or the rustle of leaves that drew his attention, but the subtle shift that came with danger. He had heard tales of Gentry, the notorious outlaw leading a band of thieves, but never thought they would dare approach his homestead. Outside, the air felt electric. Jacob could hear the distant laughter of men, coarse and mocking, echoing through the fields. Gentry and his gang were closing in. They thrived on fear, feeding off the anxiety of the townsfolk like vultures circling a carcass. But inside Jacob, fear quickly transformed into determination. "Not today," he whispered, gripping the worn handle of the flintlock rifle resting against the wall. It was more than just a weapon. It was a symbol of his family's legacy, passed down through generations, each notch in the wood telling a story of defense and perseverance. As Jacob stepped onto the porch, the cool morning air wrapped around him like a cloak. He stood tall, eyes fixed on the impending threat, ready to face whatever storm lurked in the shadows. A farmer's heart is woven with strength, and he could feel the whispers of past generations urging him to stand firm. "Come on, Miller." Gentry's voice boomed, a taunting challenge designed to provoke. The laughter of the gang surged, buoyed by the thrill of their impending conquest. Jacob shouted back, defiance ringing clear. The wind carried his words like a challenge thrown into the depths of an ocean. He knew that these men were not just thieves. They were reflections of their own insecurities, bolstered by bravado. The outlaws edged closer, their boots crunching on the gravel, but Jacob's heart remained resolute. He had witnessed death, drought, and despair, but the land he fought for was more than just dirt and crops. It was home, and he was its guardian. "Look at him." Gentry laughed, but there was a hint of doubt creeping into his bravado. The line between confidence and fear whispered in the air, and even the other outlaws felt the tremor. Jacob tightened his grip on the rifle, steadying himself as he focused on Gentry's face. "I'm not afraid of you or your gang." The moment hung heavy, a taut string on the verge of snapping. Gentry glanced nervously at his men, seeking validation for their next move. This was no ordinary encounter. He was faced with a man who had nothing to lose and everything to fight for. "Enough talk." Gentry shouted, trying to rally his crew to push forward, but the confidence in his voice faltered. Jacob stood firm, heart thrumming in rhythm with the pulse of the earth beneath him. He could feel the weight of history in his shoulders, the struggles of every farmer who had ever faced thieves, nature, or despair. You think strength comes from fear. It doesn't. As the outlaws moved closer, Jacob faced each of them with unwavering resolve. He had spent countless nights tending to his land, every grain of soil singing into his blood, every sunset a reminder of what he defended. And now, here on this porch, no one would take that from him. Gentry forced a laugh, but the sound rang hollow. His bravado was slipping through his fingers like sand, and he recognized the tension crackling in the air. "There are things worth fighting for," Jacob replied, his voice steady. "And I will fight for my land, my family." A sudden gust of wind swept across the fields, intertwining with Jacob's words, carrying the scent of the earth with it, a reminder that deep roots anchor you to the ground. Confirmation of purpose surged within him, amplifying his resolve. Just as the chaos of the moment intensified, Jacob's eyes caught the glimpse of the youngest outlaw among the group. The boy's face bore a hint of uncertainty, as if the weight of the moment hung heavy on him alone. Jacob recognized that look, the look of someone who was questioning their choices. "Don't do this," Jacob called out, directing his attention to the boy. The flicker of doubt in the boy's eyes gave Jacob hope. He could see the struggle within, the boy caught between fear and loyalty, the allure of the outlaw life and the yearning for redemption. Gentry sneered, but the air shifted. Decision loomed over the gang like a storm cloud ready to burst. Jacob urged, his voice softer, earnest. "This life leads only to pain." As Jacob's words sunk in, the gang hesitated, the tension palpable. Gentry sensed the instability of his crew and his frustration bubbled over. "Shut up," he spat, but it was too late. Doubt had begun to permeate the group like a slow poison. In a moment that felt suspended in time, the boy stepped back from the edge of chaos. "I don't want to hurt anyone," he admitted, his voice trembling yet filled with a newfound strength. Gentry's mouth fell agape. He asked, incredulity mixed with anger, Maybe we don't need this." The power inside Jacob surged. He was no longer alone in the struggle. The boy's choice resonated throughout the group, stirring the conscience buried beneath their hardened exteriors. Jacob felt waves of energy surging as some of the men began to shift uncomfortably, looking away from Gentry. "I can't keep doing this," one of Gentry's men muttered, stepping back. Every word felt like a thread unraveling the fabric of their malicious intent. Courage began to blossom, light piercing the shadow of fear. Jacob took a breath. He was close to an opening. There's more to life than running or scaring others. "You can choose a new path," he implored, his voice full of conviction, the warmth of the morning sun a testimony to the truth of his words. Gentry, sensing his grip slipping, roared in anger. But the realization that had set in among his men was undeniable. Each of them felt the pull toward something better than chaos and crime. One by one, they began to back away from Gentry, the boy standing firm in the face of their former leader. "You can find peace." Jacob encouraged, taking a step forward, filling the space with strength rather than aggression. The sun crested the horizon, casting a warm glow over the field. Jacob felt it. This was the moment everything could shift, not just for him, but for those standing beside him, even those who had once harbored darkness. "Let's go home," the boy finally said, his eyes brightening with hope. A wave of rebellion swept through a couple more gang members, the choice to step away from Gentry, and the life he had led began to resonate deeply. Jacob's steady gaze and calm demeanor fueled their hesitation, breaking the spell of fear Gentry had cast. Gentry shouted, voice a mixture of desperation and rage. But the transformation was underway. With every moment, the bonds of loyalty to a violent life began to dissolve. As the last men chose to follow the boy, Jacob stood a beacon of resolve. "There's always a choice," Jacob replied, heart swelling with pride for those finding their way out of the darkness. Eventually, the gang fractured, each member retreating into the fog that had once cloaked their ambitions. The sound of laughter and bravado faded, leaving behind the weighty silence of unspoken decisions. Jacob breathed deep, words of defiance settling in the air. The dawn had not only brought light to the fields, but also illuminated pathways to redemption for those who took the chance to turn away. As Gentry vanished into the mist, Jacob stood tall, rifle lowered, but still in hand. He had faced more than just a group of outlaws today. He had faced the complexities of human choice, of fear, and of courage. He felt the warmth of the sun on his back and the strength of the land beneath his feet, reminding him of everything he had fought for. Life lay ahead, full of promise and possibility, anchored by the lessons learned from the struggle. Jacob realized today was not just about resistance. It was also about hope, a hope that did not belong solely to him, but could be shared with anyone willing to reclaim their story from the hands of darkness. As he stepped back into his farmhouse, a renewed sense of purpose washed over him. He knew he would continue to defend his home, his legacy, and the land beneath his feet, because bravery was not just the absence of fear. It was the courage to stand tall in the face of it, and to offer a better choice when the world threatened to tear you down. The first light of dawn fought its way through the heavy mist, transforming the flat expanse of farmland into a rolling sea of gold. Jacob Miller stood on his porch, coffee mug in hand, the steam rising like a soft whisper against the brisk morning air. It was peaceful, serene even, with only the distant cawing of crows echoing through the fields. But just a few hundred yards away, shadows stirred, and a simmering tension lurked beneath the surface. Gentry, the leader of a notorious band of outlaws, was crouched low among the wheat just beyond the tree line. His eyes narrowed as he spotted the figure of Jacob, a simple farmer who had no idea of the danger heading his way. Today, Gentry thought today would be easy. Freighted with drunken confidence from the night before, he believed this small farmhouse would yield easily. He hissed, glancing back at his men, their faces a mix of excitement and anxiety. The gang mumbled their agreement, raucous laughter spilling into the air. Each man felt invincible, convinced that the thrill of the chase and the promise of treasure outweighed the risks. It wasn't the first time they had raided a small homestead, and it certainly wouldn't be the last. But Jacob Miller was not just any farmer. He had faced storms, droughts, and heart-wrenching losses. He had buried too many family members under the roots of the old oak tree at the edge of his fields, each grave a testament to resilience and the struggle for survival. Today, he would not yield. As the laughter of the outlaws swirled like a tempest, Jacob felt an unsettling chill crawling up his spine. He put down his mug, mind racing. He had paid attention to the rumors. The outlaws were getting braver, bolder. It was only a matter of time before they aimed their sights at his land. He turned back to the house, heart thumping wildly as he reached for the old flintlock rifle hanging by the door. The rifle felt heavy in his hands, but it was more than just a weapon. It was a relic of his family's legacy, forged from a history of hard work and determination. Every scratch in its wooden stock told stories of defense and perseverance, just like the land he defended. With a deep breath, Jacob stepped out onto the porch, squinting through the mist as he scanned the horizon. "I will not back down," he declared to the stillness, voice steady as he gripped the rifle tighter. He was no stranger to adversity, nor to the unpredictable nature of life on the farm. Without warning, Gentry burst from the wheat, leading his gang toward the farmhouse with reckless abandon. Shouts erupted from the outlaws, the sound ripping through the tranquility of the morning. "Miller!" Jacob shouted back, aiming his rifle into the air, the shot resounding like thunder. The sound shattered the stillness, echoing against the looming barn behind him. His heart raced, adrenaline slamming through his veins. As Gentry and his gang froze momentarily in shock, Jacob felt emboldened. There was tension in the air, thick enough to cut with a knife. The outlaws exchanged uneasy glances, and Jacob took a step forward, fueled by the fierce spirit that had long dwelled within him. Jacob called out, voice unwavering, his heart steady even as it beat hard against his chest. He had spent so long building a life rooted in love, sacrifice, and resilience. He was not about to let it fall to the likes of these men. Gentry's shock turned to anger, his bravado rising like smoke. "You're just a farmer." He brandished his gun, but the uncertainty plagued him now, marking an edge of doubt even in the heart of chaos. "I know enough to stand my ground," Jacob replied, lifting the rifle slightly, his stance steady and grounded as he took another step forward. "Know enough to protect my home." The tension crackled in the air, palpable and electric. Gentry scoffed, masking his doubt with bravado. "We've taken towns, Jacob." But in that moment, thousands of years of history surged within Jacob. His heart swelled with the weight of centuries of farmers before him, all the men and women who had stood their ground against forces far greater than themselves. He felt their spirits whispering in the wind, nudging him forward. "This land is more than just dirt." Jacob's voice rang out, clear and defiant. Each word pierced the veil of intimidation, drawing a line in the sand between him and the chaos unfolding before him. Gentry shouted, pulling his men closer. He ordered, frustration boiling over. The outlaws surged forward, confidence restored by their leader's command, but Jacob was ready. Jacob yelled. He aimed the rifle again, his steadiness unwavering. The old flintlock may have been rusted, but it still held the power to defend his legacy. Gentry faltered again, sensing the resolve emanating from Jacob. In that moment, he saw something in the farmer's eyes, not just fearlessness, but an unyielding spirit that was rare in men machine gunning through life. One of the outlaws shouted, firing off a shot, but Jacob's instincts kicked in. He ducked to the side, the blast ringing in his ears like a distant bell tolling a warning. He leveled his rifle. "I won't ask again." Jacob's command echoed over the fields, resonating not just in their ears but tugging at their conscience. In the chaos, Jacob caught sight of one young outlaw, not much older than a teenager, standing a little behind the others. There was fear etched in his face, a flicker of doubt in his eyes. Jacob could see the boy struggling, caught between the life he was part of and the longing for something more. Jacob called, appealing directly to the boy. "You can choose honor over fear." The young man hesitated. Jacob could see him weighing his options, and something within Jacob stirred an instinct to reach out and grasp someone's humanity, to pull them back from the brink. Each moment stretched, and Gentry's desperation painted a grim picture. "What are you waiting for?" But as the boy glanced toward Gentry, Jacob spoke, pushing through the noise. "You're not bound to this life. You can walk away." The boy wavered, and Jacob felt a surge of hope. Caught between loyalty and the whisper of a new path, the young outlaw shook his head. The words erupted, breaking free as if they had been trapped inside for far too long. Gentry spat out, rage breaking through his facade. But the tide had turned. The gang, once a cohesive unit of bravado and intimidation, began to falter. One of the older outlaws finally chimed in. "He's standing for something here." Whispers of rebellion rippled through them as uncertainty spread like wildfire. They began stepping back, faces grappling with the truth spoken so plainly. The battle they thought they would win was crumbling around them, unraveling before their very eyes. Jacob saw it. He felt it. Each decision to turn away from chaos shone brighter than a sun in full bloom. "You don't have to fight me," he said gently. "You can let go of this life." The boy looked back at Jacob, seeing the strength radiating from him, a beacon of hope nestled in the tension of the moment. One by one, men began turning away from Gentry, the bond of loyalty holding them captive starting to shatter. A voice rang out, clear and strong. Rage and disbelief flooded Gentry's face, his face contorting with every ounce of fury as he realized his power was slipping through his fingers, just like the last light of day dissolving into twilight. Gentry shouted, but the urgency in his voice fell on deaf ears. They turned their backs on him, stepping away from the clutches of chaos. "Boys, let's go home," the young outlaw finally said, stepping away from the darkness. The surge of freedom washed over him, and in that moment he chose to define his own destiny. Jacob stood tall, rifle lowered, heart lightening as he watched the transformation unfold. It wasn't just a victory over fear. It was a testament to the power of resilience, of standing firm when the world sought to tear you down. With Gentry seething behind, the ranks of the outlaws broke like glass shattering on the floor, pieces scattering in every direction. Jacob felt the weight of generations lifting as he saw the last remnants of Gentry's hold fade into the distance. Jacob called back, voice steady, like iron. "For what?" With a frustrated roar, Gentry turned on his heel, retreating into the forest that had once seemed impenetrable. Jacob glanced back toward the young outlaw and the others who had chosen to walk away. The sun had fully risen now, bathing the fields in warm hues that spoke of renewal. Hope swelled within his heart, filling the space where anxiety had once dwelled. "You've made the right choice," Jacob said, stepping down from the porch, his heart beating steadily with inspiration. The boy looked back, newfound determination shining in his eyes. As the outlaws melted into obscurity, Jacob felt the last remnants of fear dissolve under the weight of his convictions. He had stood his ground, unwavering and fierce, and together they had transformed the chaos into a story of redemption. With the dawn trumpeting new beginnings, Jacob knew he had fought not just against the outlaws, but for a message that would resonate through generations. He would continue to nurture the land, to protect what was his, and to pass on the spirit of resilience that echoed within him. As he turned toward his fields, tracing the lines of his labor, he breathed deeply, letting the air fill his lungs. The battle may have been won today, but the true victory lay in the choices made in the face of fear, the strength to reclaim their stories, and the resolve to stand tall against whatever storms breached their horizon. The first rays of sunlight shimmered over the horizon, illuminating the rich tapestry of life that thrived in the fields. Jacob may have faced outlaws at sunrise, but he emerged victorious, a defender not just of his land but of hope, courage, and the unyielding spirit that dwelled within them all. The sun peeked over the horizon, spilling golden light across the rustling fields of wheat like molten honey. But in the quiet of the morning, something sinister lurked just beyond the edge of the forest. Shadows moved with purpose, grown men armed with malice and greed, their hearts pounding with the thrill of what lay ahead. Jacob Miller stood on the porch of his modest farmhouse, mug of coffee clutched tightly in his hands. He took a moment to breathe in the fresh morning air, feeling the peace of the land wrap around him. Yet an unsettling tension hung in the air like a storm cloud ready to burst. It weighed heavy on his soul. There was a shift that signaled danger, something he had grown accustomed to, living in these parts for so long. He squinted against the brightness of dawn, scanning the edges of the woods. And there, just beyond the trees, he spotted them, a band of outlaws, their faces grim and determined. Gentry led them, a notorious figure with a reputation for terror. He had stolen from farms before, leaving ruin in his wake, and now he had come for Jacob's land. Without hesitation, Jacob set his coffee down. Memories flooded back, moments of joy and pain tied to this land, all the years of hard work and love woven into every inch of soil he had nurtured. He would not let them have it without a fight. Jacob shouted, his voice rising above the rustling wheat. Gentry paused mid-step, a smirk claiming his face. The gang chuckled, emboldened by Gentry's arrogance. But Jacob wasn't about to give up, not today. He stepped off the porch, firm and unwavering, feeling the cool earth beneath his boots. As the outlaws closed in, a palpable tension settled in the air. Gentry raised his gun, a glint of madness in his eyes. But Jacob knew something about fear that Gentry didn't. True courage isn't the absence of fear, it's standing your ground despite it. He raised his rifle, the old flintlock steady in his hands. Sunlight gleamed off it, casting an intimidating reflection. The laughter ceased, replaced by an uncertain silence. "I'll give you one last chance, Gentry," he said. Gentry spat. "I'm more than just a farmer," Jacob countered, every word like a hammer driving a nail into the ground. "I'm a protector of my home." With that, the moment cracked like thunder as Gentry charged forward, and his men followed, caught up in the madness of an eager mob. The chaos unleashed a frenzy in the air, everything swirling into a storm of violence. Jacob held his ground, heart racing. The world around him slowed. He had faced storms, droughts, and loss in his life. Today wouldn't be any different. Today, he would defend what was his. A shot rang out, echoing through the wheat fields, but not from Jacob's rifle. One of Gentry's men fired, and the bullet whizzed past Jacob, grazing the porch railing. Adrenaline surged, and Jacob ducked instinctively. Gentry bellowed, his voice laced with desperation and fury. The outlaws surged forward, their faces twisted in a mix of rage and triumph. Jacob steadied himself, raising his rifle once more. He had little time to think, little time to question his resolve. Each heartbeat felt like an eternity as the chaos erupted around him. Jacob's breath quickened, adrenaline flooding his veins. He squeezed the trigger, the shot ringing clear and true, striking the ground just before the oncoming gang. He shouted, the sound carrying command in every line of his body. They hesitated, caught off guard by the fierce determination that radiated from him. For a moment, Jacob saw the flicker of doubt wash over their faces. Fear is a powerful motivator, far beyond bullets and bravado. He took a step forward, the rifle across his chest steady and firm, calling out to the humanity he sensed hidden within them. "Why do you choose this life? You're not just outlaws, you're men." For a split second, someone among Gentry's crew hesitated, the flicker of uncertainty more powerful than any weapon. But Gentry was quick to lash out, shoving the man hard. Don't listen to him. But the man's resolve was fading, and Jacob felt the tide shifting against Gentry's will. Jacob urged, keeping his eyes on the man who'd flinched, making him the focal point of his plea. "You can walk away from fear and let it go." Gentry's face twisted with anger, eyes darting from Jacob to the man struggling to decide. "You want to choose a coward's path. Those words hung in the air, and in the charged silence, Jacob knew. He cried, "All of you, you don't have to be shackled to this life." As uncertainty loomed large, the man who had hesitated finally took a step back, his decision made. "No more," he said, voice firming with every word. It was as if a spell had broken. One by one, other gang members began to fall away, their faces reflecting doubt. Jacob could see the wheels turning in their minds, weighing the thrill of chaos against the clarity of truth. Gentry's anger ignited. He shouted at his men, desperation in his voice. "You're weak. Cowards," but the truth rang louder than Gentry's shouts. Jacob countered, eyes sharp and fierce. The sun broke over the horizon, illuminating Jacob's stance. In that moment of clarity, hope surged forth. The men began to shift, stepping back from the looming threat of violence, as if the morning light had whispered the wisdom of choice. The boy who had hesitated shouted, breaking ranks and stepping away from the chaos of Gentry's desperation. A few more followed, voices of support rising above Gentry's angry roars. Jacob felt the ground beneath him shift, uncertainty fading as bravery emerged once again. He raised his rifle not to threaten but to protect what was left of his home and family. "Leave now, Gentry. Choose your path wisely," Jacob warned, the power of his words echoing in the rising sun. But Gentry was too furious to listen, his rage consuming him. "You'll pay for this, Miller." The dark form of his remaining men began to scatter, retreating into the shadows of the trees. One by one, they chose the undefined grace of freedom over the chains of misplaced loyalty. Jacob lowered his rifle, heart pounding. Gentry's voice grew small, swallowed by the rising light of day. Just then it happened. A sudden movement in the trees caught Jacob's eye. A flash of darker figures emerged, a new threat. His heart raced as the realization hit. More outlaws, reinforcements for Gentry. Before Jacob could process it, the men behind him turned to see what was happening. Jacob felt the air thrumming with renewed tension, his heart pounding against his chest like a war drum. He called out, gripping the rifle tightly once more. The newfound freedom of those who broke ranks now hung in the balance. The shadows deepened, and Jacob braced himself for the next wave of chaos. The fate of his land and his legacy balanced precariously on the edge of uncertainty as he stood tall against the adversities rising at dawn. The moment became a still frame of chaos and resolve as the outlaws surged forward once more, relentless and hungry. The sun painted the scene in light, fate still omnipresent. As a battle loomed ahead, the clash between courage and fear, the very essence of humanity colliding in the fragile dawn. Would Jacob stand firm against the onslaught, or would he find himself swallowed by the dark embrace of violence that threatened to upend everything he had fought for? Only the day would tell.